Hello, listeners, and welcome to the latest version of the AdQuick Madvertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of content, creativity, culture, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest. We have David Armano. He's a longtime friend of mine, an OG online marketing blogger, marketing executive, and currently the CEO of TBD, which we'll get into a bit more in just a minute. I'm super excited to have David on the show. He's a true iconoclast in our sector, really interesting guy. And I'm just excited to even get to talk with David today and have an hour of his time. So David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. That's very, very kind of you, Adam, because I think you've been crushing it with your writing and thinking. And, I know that we've been going back and forth on the digital channels, probably primarily X, and discussing the sort of state of thought leadership. And I feel like you're one of the few folks out there that is pushing independent thinking, quality thinking, and getting people to think about things, which is the whole point of thought leadership.
Thanks. I think for a while, I think we've explored so many best practices in the marketing sphere, and anything you need to know, not only can you Google, but you can ask the AI, and kind of the actual how to do things is solved. And we need to talk about the why. We need to talk about the strategy. In a lot of cases, I don't even think we need more tips or tricks. I think we need to understand the broader culture and get back to what marketing is all about, which is understanding the world, understanding our users, and creating great things. And that doesn't come if we stay in our bubble or just read, 3 tips of how to draft a better email headline. It's just not going to get us anywhere interesting.
Yeah. Your audience, if I assume marketing is one of the things that they do, and probably heavy into technology. But I think a huge thing that's going on right now within the space that is fueled by AI is it's like the age-old debate between performance marketing and brand marketing, right? Where one is very much data-based and one is more sort of left-brained, and the other is much more kind of gut-based and much more right-brained. And I think what we're going to see is I don't know how great it was, an interesting piece in the Atlantic that got into sort of the history and the kind of rise and fall of the Ivy League. And one of the things that really stood out to me was it was getting into the distinction between essentially IQ and EQ. And I think AI is accelerating that distinction, where AI is smart. It's the IQ, and everyone has access to higher IQ through AI. So the EQ will become increasingly important. The emotional intelligence, the ability to get into things like insights, all of that is increasingly important now.
Yeah, I'm somewhat concerned with our sector, particularly on the creative side. Like, there's a lot of people totally dismissing AI. I've seen so many like pure ad creatives and pure artists like kind of writing it off. And there was a great segment with Ben Affleck that you can watch. It was an NBC interview. And for those who haven't seen it, go check it out. But basically he said, look, AI is a craftsman. Like, you can show it how to make the chair and it will make the chair, but it's not the auteur, right? And so, but you wouldn't ignore a tool if AI could get you amazing, B-roll for a movie or a video, right? It just expands your palette and maybe makes a lot of things possible, particularly for small teams or resource constrained teams right now. Like, you can get good enough work that you perhaps would have had to farm out to really expensive, contractors in the past. And I think to write it all off is a big mistake. But anyway, let's actually dial back. I wrote down.
We should spend a second on that, because I thought Affleck nailed it, but specifically in the context of high art, which is movies, where yes, more people will now be able to do craft more efficiently, and that's where he kind of nailed it. Is that it allows us to increase the numbers of people that can actually perform high craft. But his comparison to Shakespeare and saying that not everyone will be a Shakespeare, and AI still can't do that. It's it's true. There's still going to be a place for the art. Now, but here's the distinction. I think he nailed it. But to go back to the performance marketing, and especially probably for your audience, which does a lot of B2B, AI is massively disrupted because good enough is good enough. AI does good enough. And so much of the email marketing that's out there, so much of the performance marketing out there, so much of the things where we're sort of tweaking the numbers here and there, AI could do really well. So that's not high art. So we have to be honest about these conversations.
Yeah, I think a lot of marketers they don't understand the notion of triage. And so they chase their tail, like optimizing these things way at the end. And it's like the worst use of their time, right? They should be shipping good enough, ship it for a lot of work, especially B2B where it's not scaled out to millions of people, right? And like all of your work becomes, it really should compound both on the organic content side and the growing email lists and the building MQLs. And you're never going to get there if you're just like, everything has to be perfect. It also goes back to, you were talking about like credentialism in academia. We're not academics and marketers. It's a messy thing. You know this well from, not just your work for brands, but I think all of your thoughts are very incisive because you built I think you had like the top Ad Age blog at one point, which is really its own media company that you built from scratch. So I think when you do something like that, you have the perspective of not just the big company, the media brand that already has all the distribution, but how you actually would go through all of the steps to get there. And I think the problem is everything is so hyper competitive now that you need to know how to do this almost entrepreneurial thing that no marketers were taught in school. And all of that involves like just this mindset that's biased to shipping. And I think a lot of marketers instead have this mindset to bias to like perfection. And when you can, I also think working at a startup can solve this too. Like you don't have to start your own blog and build it to 100,000 visits a month. I think if you work at a scrappy enough startup where like you'll either make it work as a senior marketer or you'll just be like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. And it's very humbling, right? Like I come from I started my life consulting for smaller brands, then I went to Google, and now I'm back working for a startup. And I actually like this work more because there's not like 10 different groups and teams and people that every single thing has to go. It's just more fun.
Yeah. I mean, the larger organizations, bureaucracy is a feature, not a bug, right? And that's how it will always be.
It's really annoying. So I want to dial back because I know you're going to have fun thoughts on a bunch of questions and topics that I've spoken with other guests in the past. So let's get back to just the industry that both of us kind of left, like the big agency world and sort of the big company world. And I just feel like there's so much groupthink there. I feel like a lot of people are kind of doing the same things. They almost feel like they're all rolling up to like these points that like ESG scores are telling companies to do in regards to certain creative. And I feel like we've lost like the real iconoclast kind of Don Draper-esque, David Ogilvy-esque ad men, where it's almost like they're more management consultants than creatives. And I don't know if you get this sense when you see a lot of the ads that are shipped by big companies. You watch the Super Bowl ads and they all almost feel like Marvel movies, right? They just feel like sequels. None of them are very good or interesting. One of the only really interesting pieces of creative, and it wasn't even very good, but at least it was different, was like the Coinbase ad where they put a QR code and some music on the screen. At least it was different. But I'm curious, you talk to a lot of ad creatives. Is this overblown in my head, or do you think this is a real thing?
I think it's a real thing. And I think what you just laid out is actually several things that probably overlap, but they are distinct things. And we probably don't have enough time in this to get into every single one. I do think one of the things that I'm seeing happen in our space, and it makes me nervous and not in a good way, is I think we as professionals, marketers, communicators, even customer experience, which that's a part of what I've always done in my career. We're losing two critical things that are really important, and we can get into why. We're losing the ability to be truly empathetic. and we're losing the ability to also be objective. And something you and I have discussed a little bit, both online and offline. Great example, I guess somewhat related to the election, is you're seeing people retreat into their tribes. And this is a surefire way to guarantee that marketing, communications, customer experience, all these things that we do as professionals are going to become worse, because you have to look at your audiences objectively, understand them objectively, without bias, almost like a scientist, and have that sort of clinical understanding as more like a social scientist. But then you have to know when you need to dive in deep and sort of lean into your empathy, and it cannot just be a one-sided empathy. You cannot only relate to one of your audiences. Businesses now have audiences that look at the world in a very, in 20 different ways. Our audiences have become fragmented. Our belief systems have become fragmented, but also polarized. So I think what happens is when you lose those things, but yet you live in the reality of, the world is polarized, and then you try to play it safe. What does safe breed? It breeds formulas. And formulas never connect with anyone, right? Formulas and playing it safe, don't really connect. And the other thing that formulas don't guarantee is something that may have worked in the past may not necessarily work in the future, because that's what a formula by definition is. Well, we tried this and it worked these number of times, so it should work. But the world is always changing, so formulas are not guaranteed.
Yeah, and also AI is really good at formulas. It's really good at making version 2 of something in the past. So I feel like it's going to get compounded bad. One other area that kind of depresses me is, okay, so you could say the ad side of the trade is in their groupthink. They're going to these festivals, kind of all pushing a lot of the same messages. But it's kind of depressing to me that you see something similar on the media side of the trade, where like Disney has infinite sequels to nowhere, right? They just buy old IP. They're casting kind of the same stars over and over again. They're not giving new people a shot. And it kind of, it's weird, because there's this old clip with Frank Zappa, and he's talking about the music industry and how in the 60s, for a brief period, there was a lot of great music that was released. And when you looked at who were the people running the labels at the time, it wasn't young, hip guys. It was these cigar chomping old guys that looked at the product and they said, I don't know, let's take a chance on it. And they had this really entrepreneurial spirit, and they shipped a lot of stuff, and they did really well. And now we're kind of in this, it almost was more dangerous to have like these young people who are, they're like almost just risk managers. They're like afraid of anything new because they're trying to do things that are guaranteed success. And I think we've lost that. Good creativity is risk, right? It's a gamble. It's like a lot of small budget flicks, like Napoleon Dynamite was made on I think 4.2 million. And it's just this memorable, lovely movie. And we don't see anything like that anymore. And not just in movies and, TV and music and all these areas. Lindy Man, I don't know if you've seen this guy, Lindy Man. He talks about this. He calls it stuck culture. And it's just, I feel like we need to do something, or there has to be a breaking point where we just break out of this. And I think the internet should have allowed that. Like, I listen to all of these really interesting and obscure techno and punk and rock bands that no one's heard of, and they're just never going to get, dollars behind them like any of the pop stars today. So it's this kind of multifaceted thing. It's not in one industry. It's kind of in all of the big money creative industries. And hopefully the market sorts it out, but it's kind of a dark time if you're into really interesting and creative stuff. In a lot of cases, I find myself going backwards, not forwards.
So I'm going to reference the Affleck interview, because he hit on another thing that I think is very true. I think he used the term tastemakers, and Adam, to dig into that example of the older cigar chomping executives. I'm going to probably say this like it's fact, and I don't know if it is, but I think it is, because I've seen it portrayed in movies and I believe it's true. Those elderly cigar chomping executives, they always one of the talents that they had was that they were tastemakers, and they surrounded themselves with youth, and they had this ability to know which direction the culture was shifting in. And when Affleck talked about, again, the context here is entertainment, so that's high art. But I do think there's a nugget of truth that could even translate into the B2B world, which is the role of being a tastemaker and the role of really understanding and forecasting where the trends are going to be. And also using things that I think that humans are really good at. I'm going to give you another example, and I'm going to play up AI here and the strengths, because I'm a believer in AI. I'm also talking about all the bad that will come with AI because it's such a powerful technology. But I see the magic. So I'm a Spotify user. I like the product. It works for me. And when Spotify came out with the AI DJ, it was kind of like magic. And being a Gen Xer, one of the things that it did magically right was it used a really good natural language processing technology. And the voice of the DJ sounded like an old school DJ from my youth. And when I hear the DJ going, "Hey, David, you've been getting into X, Y, and Z lately, so I'm going to play you this." And it's kind of a great consumer experience. It's really good. And I found myself using it. Now, another music product that I also love and maybe love a little bit more is Radio Paradise, which is all human curated. Okay. It is all just purely humans and just, and they're connoisseurs of music. And I've just found that that what they pull together and what they curate almost nails it every day and introduces me to new things. And it's not repetitive, and it's not going back to my playlist to learn from it and sort of regurgitating back to me. So in a lot of ways, I keep coming back and using Radio Paradise, this sort of human curation, taste-making machine. And they're both great. There's going to be a place for both of those experiences in the world. It just hit me in that own personal example. I'm like, oh, this is how we'll play out in our lives. When it comes to all different kinds of media and technology, like there will be a time and place for AI where it feels magical, but also falls short of what humans can do.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I think with regards to, a tool like Spotify's AI sourcing you good music, I think anything that sources you interesting music is the right answer. I've kind of dropped a lot of my pejoratives around like AI. Like if you find stuff that's cool, then because we live in an infinite content world. So however you get there, I think is a good thing. David, in terms of, I want to talk a little bit more about you because you're so interesting, and I think you're one of the first bloggers that I ever read as a junior marketer. For listeners who are young, David had this great blog, Logic Plus Emotion. He still is writing on Substack, and we'll link his site in the description. But you've gone through this great journey from kind of, known as a blogger and voice in marketing, and then a senior exec at Edelman to, startups and AI, and now doing your own thing. I wonder what someone who's more junior and maybe starting their career, like any words of wisdom you might impart to them to help someone like that. Like what can they do to maybe, skip ahead in their career, I guess, and some lessons that you perhaps learned that you would impart to someone to not make?
God, I mean, there were so many experiences during that time. So getting into blogging during those early days, and the internet was so different, as we talked about. It was very much a different world. One of the best things it did for me in my career was it did the kinds of things that I think you would need to do that you could only get done if you like spent a lot of money and went and got your master's degree, essentially. Seriously, it basically provided, put me on a fast track and presented opportunities where just when I went to Edelman, for example, everyone that I talked to, they already knew me. They already already knew how I thought, and I got pretty much hired on the spot. And I had a really great career run there. And that was, so much of that was due to blogging and the kinds of things that I blogged about: marketing, communications, customer experience, all those things. And it was changing very dynamically. And that was an amazing, I got so many opportunities. I got opportunities to speak around the world. And something I realized about myself was I had I didn't have the fear of audiences. So I got pretty good at the public speaking thing. So I got lots of opportunities. On the flip side, and this is a learning that I'll take to my, end of days, that I would caution with your audience. It was also like being a canary in the coal mine of all the negative aspects of social media. I absolutely got caught up in the whole personal brand thing and like self-absorbed. And when I would go to South by Southwest, people would come up to me and treat me like a celebrity. And it was super uncomfortable. But also, too, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it went right to my head. I mean, I'm only human, and there's a lot of negative things that come with that. I mean, navel gazing is just bad. When you are thinking about yourself, and you become self-absorbed. And I don't know if I became self-absorbed per se, but I definitely was thinking about myself too much. That's just not a healthy space to be in. And I think, so again, it's another design versus a bug. Social media. That is the feature. It forces you to think about yourself. So all the people that are doing great online and making money, just know that there is a price that you will come, and I have to pay with that. And I think the people who will navigate that best are the people who can see it purely as a business and compartmentalize it and just see it as, this is just a persona that I do to make money versus this is who I am. The people that tie those things together, you'll be in for a ride.
Yeah, you never seemed like, there's a few people in the marketing industry, like the Gary Vees of the world. You always were humble and kind to everyone, and I never saw any of the fame and attention that you got go to your head. But certainly to someone like me starting in my career, I was like, Dave's a rock star, and I want to be like this guy. And I think that's a good thing, right? Like, you get to set an example for young people, and you get to, generously give back to the world through your writing, through speeches, through mentorship you do of young people. I think that what a wonderful opportunity to be able to scale, what's in your head. Do you want to talk a little bit about, for this audience, for a while, David used to do infographics, sort of coalescing what's happening in the world, in really interesting visual forms. David, can you impart, a lot of our marketers also have to create, infographics, whether it's a data story or, something to market their brand. Can you share some lessons from doing that for so long? Because I feel like you're someone who you were doing it for the love of the game, not even for work.
Yeah, it was like a hobby. Absolutely. I mean, I would do my 9 to 5 or whatever job, and sort of, whether it was during a lunch break or an evening or a weekend, kind of sneak in writing and visualizing. It's less about, yes, I did do these sort of hallmark visuals, and it wasn't that they were infographics, which is now a commodity. It's what people were drawn to, and I think are still drawn to. My style has now changed. It looks much more hand-drawn. I get a lot of enjoyment in actually doing things on my iPad, and it's got a more distinctive look. But what I'm still doing is I'm storytelling, and I'm doing it in a very specific way that people find valuable. And I think this is one of the things that marketers should just figure out how to do. Storytelling is extremely important. Synthesizing, capturing something in an image, whether that's a photograph. And my goodness, look at the election and look at some of the moments that became iconic, and that also told a story. These things are very important. As much as we live in a data-rich world, as much as we live in a world where we have endless amounts of information, this kind of, again, goes back to the AI versus human combination. What I do, whether I'm writing or in these visuals, is I try to distill down an idea, oftentimes a complex idea, into its most simplest form of a communication. And I found that is what resonates with audiences. And audiences are starving for it. Adam, you just wrote about this, right? With the Ogilvy, they are starving for clear, concise, and insightful communication, whether that's visual or written word or a video. People, they want the insight. They want something to be clear. They want to understand it, and they want to think about it, and they want to be inspired. And so that's these things that I do through some form of visual thinking or another. That's what it is. It's actually distilling down, communicated clearly, visually, with some insight, with a perspective, and then getting people to think about that and putting it into action.
Yeah, and I don't think our industry is very good at this. You see this shown through things like the Lumascape, which everyone who's listening has seen the Lumascape, right? It's just this horrible graphic of all of these icons of the different ad tech companies in our sector and how they go together. I saw someone remix it and literally turned it into a maze, and I'm like, great, this is not a clear piece of communication to anyone. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned the election. So I can think of no fewer than 4 iconic images of Trump, for better and for worse. And then for Kamala's campaign, I can't think of a single image that they put out. And I think their team...
There's a clip which you almost just emulated. I can't think of a single thing I would do differently. That was like in a different way.
Well, it's funny because their team had way more money. They had like $1.5 billion. And I think they ran it like a big company, and like a bad big company, right? Like there was one ad where it showed all of these random people in middle America, and it was like a caricature, like it was almost like what someone sitting in an Ivy Tower in like Harvard thinks of people in middle America. And it's like, oh, I'm a man, I drink whiskey, and I play football. And it's like, that's not, like, they're just lost as to what masculinity even is. They like make this caricature of it. And I think like that's one of the big reasons they lost, is, to your point, an understanding audiences and having empathy. It really felt like there was no empathy. So we could say the product is great. Let's say she would have been the most amazing president in the world. She still wouldn't have won because all of the messaging was so bad. It's like a lot of people got to the poll and they're just like, you know what? I can't. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I just can't do it. And so there's a huge disconnect. And I think the election actually is emblematic. Those 2 teams are emblematic of a lot of what's happening in corporate America.
I mean, this goes back, Adam, you and I talked about this, and I want to make this clear. What I'm going to say is non-political. It really, really is. But it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier about being objective and almost being like a social scientist, approaching our craft as marketers, like doctors, as doctors are trained to be professional and to clinically diagnose something, and, not have any kind of emotional reaction when you take your clothes off in front of them. Like, they are professionals. We have to look at marketing in the same way. And I know there was this post on LinkedIn, and it was a marketer, a very seasoned marketer, like really questioning the Trump campaign and like kind of scratching their head. And I was flummoxed by that response, because every single, and I listed them out: authenticity, clarity, iconic moments, user generated, every single marketing trend, if I had to recommend one book that every marketer should ever read, it's a book called Made to Stick. And the premise of the book is that you basically, you boil your campaign down to a bumper sticker, to the thing that someone's going to put on their car. And when someone's driving behind them, they instantly get it and they go, yep, and they nod their head. That's oversimplifying. But that's the premise of the book. And it gets into things like storytelling, et cetera. And the Trump campaign had every single element. It had pretty much every single best practice: how to leverage earned media to be efficient with your dollars, how to, culture jack, all these things, user generated content. And I was just in awe of how our peers couldn't look at it objectively and evaluate and say, yeah, these are all the best practices that we've been evangelizing for the past 20 years.
Yeah,
in awe, actually.
I think the whole bring your whole self to work thing was deeply unhelpful for marketing, for tech, for other areas. Like if you're passionate about something and you want to be an advocate, that's wonderful. You should go work for, you know, a nonprofit or, you know, whatever, like that specific, like an activist company, an activist organization of some sort, PETA, whatever you're passionate about. That's wonderful. But I think when people start to bring this into work, they are applying something to their job that doesn't have a place there. Like to your point, acting as a social scientist, you can't run an experiment and inject your own biases into it. You're not going to get a good result. And I saw some similar stuff where one of our peers was talking about, you know, the Trump campaign and Elon, and just making some declarative statements of, you know, and people in the comments were getting like visibly upset and kind of going off the rails. And it just seemed odd to me. I don't know if it's just the shock period of, you know, having a presidential candidate that wasn't their party, or, you know, I also kind of blame the mainstream media of hyping up a lot of things and perhaps branding people to certain extremes that as a Jewish person, I'm still a little aghast by, but it is certainly an interesting time for our field. Hopefully we've kind of gotten to peak crazy, but like you said, if people are going to sequester themselves in echo chambers with people who believe the same, I don't think that's healthy for the discourse. I'm hopeful that, like, as a marketer, I lurk in a lot of places that I don't even post, and like I don't have an interest in posting, but I still show up and I still read, and I'm like, okay, this is what they think. Most people are coming from a good place, even if I don't agree with them, and it's just very helpful for me to understand the world. So I would hope any marketer, you know, will do the same and take, as you say, like a more social scientist approach, which we ultimately are social scientists with applied creativity.
Absolutely. I mean, that should be our craft. That should be the value that we bring to the table. Even as B2B marketers, you need to be aware of, if you are a B2B marketer in the tech space, you have to be acutely aware of all the trends, of the linguistics, the language, right? One distinction between, I will say this, probably a distinction between B2B and B2C in some ways is that, it's debatable how the clarity and simplification of language, professions have nomenclature, right? And so you have to speak in the nomenclature and in the jargon of the audience that you're talking to. But again, that's like taking a social scientist approach of what is the language of our customers? What is the jargon that they use? It's the same in any industry. If you were marketing to doctors, you're going to do it using their language, right? And so that's what they understand. So, but forecasting this whole kind of this cultural phenomenon that we're seeing of everyone's kind of going into their gated communities, that with people that are like-minded versus exposing themselves to, you know, the kind of rich tapestry of the world. I don't know. I don't know how that nets out as a positive. It's concerning to me.
Yeah, it's concerning to me as well. But at the same time, I do think I think for the next 4 years at least, things are going to get hopefully a bit more capitalist, and especially as we continue to leave ZERP and, you know, interest rates are off zero and companies have to act differently. Hopefully the market will work its magic and people will be like, oh, you know, this creative needs to reach more people, or our company's in trouble. And there can be different market pressures than kind of the, you know, the part of our sector really still lives in a world where winning the award at Cannes is their goal versus driving X number of leads and revenue. And I've always been at small companies where we had to act in that way, but I think a lot of big companies have gotten away from that. And I think there'll be some forcing function that will happen, especially with like all of the drama in the C-suite with CMOs churning every, you know, 2 years and going to another place and running the same playbook and trying to win their award. I think CEOs and CFOs are going to put the kibosh on a lot of that. And that will make our sector leaner and focus on doing things that have impact, and things will get better. That may be what we require.
Yep. Great.
David, in terms of the tech sector, it seems like the marketing and media world are like, some days marketers love tech. Some days marketers are like, oh no, they're making everyone doom scroll and I hate this. And, they're exploiting users. Now, as we enter the AI bubble, what's your take or just sense on the vibes of how marketing teams are feeling about ad techs, about consumer tech, about everything that's going on?
Oh my goodness, that's such a.
You can take it however you want. You can, any response is fine.
I mean, I think marketers tend to like the shiny things, but it depends. It depends on the level that you're at. I mean, if you're a CMO at a legacy company, while you're expected to be on trend, you're also just dealing with it, as we mentioned earlier, massive bureaucracies. And the reality is that you can't. You're also under pressure for results. So honestly, if you're a CMO of a big company and communications reports under you, you might care about AI from a thought leadership perspective to make sure that your company is being perceived as an innovator because you want the positive PR. But I think if you're more like in the startup world, a smaller space, look, the sentiment to me seems to be pretty bullish on these things because a lot of these AI tools are allowing people to do more with less. That's the reality. And that's the whole startup space. And then certainly if you're in the VC world, I mean, I know some VC folks, I mean, that this is their industry and this is how they're making their money, right? So they're all in on AI. Me personally, I've been trying to take, again, kind of like what I talked about with my learnings around social. I've been trying to talk about AI. I'm largely a proponent of it. It's in my space. I've sold in AI powered solutions. And so I'm an advocate, but in spending almost 20 years now and seeing the where society's at, when you look at both mobile plus social media and those things together, and you look at all the things that's all the ways that's impacted society, both good and bad, there's a lot of bad. So I think it's good to look at AI very clear-eyed. Jobs will be lost. There will be less white collar work. That's already happening. That's already happening. That was already in play without AI. As right now, especially within the tech space, efficiency is everything, and now you throw AI into the mix. So you have to look at these things, I think, the good and bad, sort of, and be honest about them.
Yeah, I kind of have this thesis that all teams are going to get leaner, but there's this big meme in Silicon Valley of like, the one person $1 billion company, right? Like people really are into that. And I don't think it's just about one person, but it's just about being able to do things so much more efficiently. And I feel like we're going to get to the point, we're already at the point where you can run like a very lean marketing team of, a handful of people, maybe at certain startups, one people with contractors with tools, really efficiently do great work. And you can even with your ad tech stack and with, tools like our tool at AdQuick, you can basically treat all of these performance channels almost like you would an index fund. You can almost say, look, the machines are going to be better at targeting than me. I don't have all the time in the world or the resources to just drill down in here all day and do ad ops. And I'm going to let the machines do this, kind of like you'd buy, SPY every week or QQQ, and kind of put some things on pure autopilot and then use your time for the human affairs, whether that's, influencer marketing, where you're actually working with some really high profile, high influence people, doing things like podcasts or YouTube videos, doing things where, the machines can't do it. And then having everything else kind of run in as automated a way as possible, refreshing creative when need be. And I think the really painful thing will be when large companies start to realize you can do this too. And it's like, I have no idea what the future of, what a large company marketing team looks like, given when I left large company land, there were already a lot of people that were kind of I guess the word not underemployed because they were full-time employees. They were just like kind of there when needed, and
True.
they were kind of like browsing CNN in the morning instead of work. It was just really interesting to me.
True.
So I don't know actually how those teams will even be structured in the world. But I know for startups, because I've been working in startups for like 5 years now, that, there are some teams that are doing great work with just a few people that I think like those teams could do the work of a Facebook or a Google. Probably not like larger consumer companies where they have like hundreds of products, but for a lot of these enterprise companies, I just think they're overstaffed.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a good time to be an entrepreneur, and it's probably the easiest time to build a business with a lot of these AI tools. And there's, all these trends are sort of converging, because you're also, I just read an article about sort of the white collar recession, but again, yes, and Adam, you just added color commentary. There were a lot of roles that were just, there is a lot of sort of inefficiency in the white collar world. And now that efficiency is the game, you're just going to see less people be employed at those sort of big bureaucratic legacy companies. So some of them will be forced into the small business world, and won't have a choice of their own. And by the way, I'm in that sort of age group. I'm interviewing right now. I'm hoping that I still do one more thing, but we'll all end up on our own. I mean, once you hit a certain point in the white collar world, once you hit a certain age, especially if it feels like tech, you will be on your own. Like, no, there's not a lot of people working in the white collar world past 55 to 60.
Yeah, I don't want to retire. I like our work. At the very least, I would still write and do podcasts and, be part of the industry conversations, however that manifests.
Yeah, and you've got a great running start on that.
It's interesting that we mentioned these large companies. I think they employ a lot of people because they kind of have some social responsibility too, if they're going to be $1 trillion company and like completely remove all of the kind of middlemen from the sector and automate it. I think like from not only like a tax incentive standpoint, but just from like a social standpoint, I think they feel some degree of need to employ people, just because it's just like otherwise obscene profits to nowhere. And it's like they're almost like we've never conceptualized a world where there's so few winners that are like removing like no one uses a travel agent anymore. And that's not to say someone couldn't build this awesome boutique travel agent for like, the mega rich. Of course, it has to start there and they can scale. But it's just an interesting time because we're moving so fast in some areas, and it's almost faster than certain people can catch up. Certain people will always say at the Vanguard, they're just like complete autists and love just learning new things, and like life is an infinite puzzle. But like, I think we also have to recognize most people aren't like that. And, with birth rate down, anxiety, depression up, I think it's like at some point we should take a step back and be like, yeah, everything's more productive, more efficient, but like we're just making everything harder for like young people to move up. And that's not great either. And there's just hopefully some people in government. One of the good things that's happening, you can like these people or hate these people, but a lot of Trump's appointees are millennials. They're late 30 and 40 something. So yeah, I think
right. They're the elder. They're your people, Adam, that are all like basically forming the cabinet. I mentioned several times about how I'm concerned that people are retreating, and that is a real concern. But here's something I'm a little bit more. I think I'm somewhat optimistic about it. I see it happening in certain conversations. So, for example, the conversations that we're starting to have around health and diet. And Adam, I know that you went through your health journey. I also did as well. And it's good to see certain conversations. I think those kinds of conversations will force different ways of thinking. And I'm gonna give an example here. So on X, related to some of the changes in our politics, like I've just noticed you can see the sort of like what conversations are getting heat. So one of the themes that I see popping up is how, and Adam, you mentioned capitalism and how sort of like we're just going to enter this growth mode in the US and how great it's going to be for the country, and how regions like Europe are falling behind, or will fall behind it even more. And there's definitely some truth to that from an economic perspective. But and when I've seen people post about that, I've responded a few times like, hey, let's not forget Europe is doing some things right because they're living on average 10 years longer than us. And life isn't just about working yourself, into poor health while you're also not taking care of yourself and then dying at 70, right? There are other things. And so there are things that are important like quality of food, leisure time. Like we will all die young if we just like basically hustle and not take care of ourselves and so just like live up the all-out capitalist life. So I'm hopeful that our sort of public discourse gets a little bit more nuanced, or that horseshoe theory that I know you talked about. Like in some ways, there's more positive aspects where like there are things where even if there's polarization happening, there's this weird kind of meeting in the middle where we'll have these awkward common ground conversations where people can kind of agree on.
Yeah, it's being a Jewish person watching horseshoe theory is actually very scary. So you see we're like at the middle, like extreme right, extreme left. Oh, Jews are bad. So
yeah, and I should say I should clarify. I'm kind of using that term in a positive, like where
yeah.
But yes, that has a negative connotation, which is appropriate.
I just did an interview with Slate. Slate called me because one of my viral tweets on inequality, like one of their editors saw it and they wanted to talk about stuff. And I think the problem of like a lot of people burning out is just everything's objectively harder, not just inflation, home prices. We've told everyone to like marry later, to have kids later, to punt on all these things. And it's just like, we had all these messages in the population that were kind of almost Peter Pan syndrome. And we told everyone to be like this. And it's kind of not their fault. They're part of the culture. I'm part of the culture too. And it's, I'm probably an extreme example since, my father died when I was young and I had to learn a lot of things on my own, but I'm definitely not alone in a lot of the things that I've had to go through. So I'm hoping we can have saner policy. A lot of the economic policy is basically just biased to keeping, the elderly in comfort at the end, and they should be comfortable, but probably not at the complete cost of everyone else and just having their home price go up. So a lot of things that I'm just glad we're talking about. And I'm apolitical. I don't care which party solves it. Let's just solve it.
These are complex. Like, they're all, and they're intertwined. Like what you just talked about, there's a lot of reasons why people aren't having families. And that is related to immigration, by the way, because you have to have a certain number of population to pay into the system for the system to work. Like that, like the math, that is a math issue. And so you see all these countries saying, okay, now our citizens aren't populating, so you have to basically bring in more people so they can pay into the system, so the system will work. I mean, that is, at least the good thing is that people are now becoming more aware of that system. But all these things are related.
Yeah, and for the tech and marketing sector, I want us to bring in any talented people who want to be here faster. I have friends who want to be in the country, are super talented, and we need to expedite, their process in. It's, when a lot of people are coming here not following the process, it's like demoralizing for all of the good people who we should want in America. It's very American spirit. We want, look at how many entrepreneurs that are from other places that came here and started $1 trillion companies. It's crazy. So yeah. David, as we're wrapping up, can you tell us where people can connect with you? Tell us about your Substack, and we'll also throw links in the description. So don't worry about that part, but give us a call to action of where to connect with you online.
I'll do that in a second, Adam. But before I get into that, since your audience, you have a lot of marketers and that are, I think everything we talked about, if you're reading the tea leaves and looking towards the future, I think if our communications and our marketing can make people feel good at a deeper level, that those are going to be the winners. I think we're in a time of 10 cents that's going to last, at minimal the next year or so. But I think people are going to need to be reassured and to feel good that the world will continue on, and anything that we can do to sort of help them feel better about their place in the world, I think is going to resonate. And if it's done in a meaningful way.
I love that.
Okay, that being said, easy place to start is my bio page, davidarmano.me. And I also, if you Google it, I also write a Substack, David by Design. If you just Google my name, David Armano, you should be able to find me from any of those places. But I'm trying to write at least once a week. I might start writing more. Adam, you've been a great inspiration. It'll be nice to get back to those sort of, right when inspiration strikes kind of thing.
Yeah, it's I had to rebuild the blogging habit because I stopped writing when I went in-house to Google for 7 years because I didn't want HR yelling at me for things that it's just not worth it. There's no upside. David, this has been great. I love speaking to you. And I'm sure this will be an awesome episode for our audience. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Still doing the YouTuber thing. And for everyone else, we will see you next week.